going to begin by seeing if the sound is working and if you can see me. So Louise, can you hear me okay?
Sounds good, Garfield. Sounds good, Garfield.
Great. Okay, and I'll just give away my apologies. I was having all kinds of trouble getting things loaded up, and thanks, Louise, for resending me the link. Could we just do a quick round? You may have, I saw a map that kind of gives us a sense of where folks are logging in from. Could we, in the chat window, just, could you tell me, first of all, what grade and what subjects you teach? If we could just start off the evening, just a quick round of getting a sense of who's here tonight and what you teach and what grade level. I'm going to turn my video off just after saying hi, and then we can get to the main slides. Great. So I see the library. Susan, can you tell me, in terms of your portfolio as a consultant, what do you have a particular focus in the work that you do within the curriculum? Great, thanks very much. So the second question I wanted to ask, if you could just put in, sorry, just waiting for a couple more. Great, wonderful, thanks, Alicia. David, that looks like you have a busy timetable there. Wow, Aboriginal Studies, Music, Science, Geography, History. You could run a school all on your own there, it looks like. So let me, okay, that makes sense. Let me ask a second question, and I'd love just to get you to weigh in before I start. Two parts to this question. Part one, if you could type in or jump on the mic, either one. Could you tell me, one, if you were to ask to define or describe what is creativity or creative thinking, how would you define it? How do you know when creativity is being shown by students or being encouraged? What does that look like? And secondly, do you think, in general, so broad strokes, do you think education currently is designed in a way that does a good job of nurturing and encouraging creativity? Do you think our schools, our curriculum is doing a good job at nurturing creativity for the most part? So what is it, and are we doing a good job at it? Just what's your sense? So if you could just throw in some thoughts. I'm just going to pause for a moment in my talking and let you tell me what you think. What do you see it as, and how well are we doing in schools? I think I was talking to myself there and realized I hadn't turned my mic back on. My apologies. I had just been reading through your comments and seeing an interesting range from Alicia, that technology can hinder students' creative abilities, that students too often want what is it supposed to look like, which may inhibit. Yet at the same time, I did see a comment that we're more accepting of creativity than we were in the past. And David, your comment that students are, when we encourage it and allow them to take the discussion directions, we can get there. So in general, I want us to think about, are there ways that we can approach learning that may enhance creativity? So here's what I'm going to do to start us off. I'm going to share my desktop because I'm using a software that I can't upload here. So I'm going to just start by sharing my desktop, and it'll mean a little bit of juggling of things, but I'll ask you in a moment if you can see. Okay, so I'm asking, so can you see the Rodin sculpture now? And I'm just going to try to shift over. If you can just give me a check if or a happy face if you can see it okay. Can you see just maybe click on the happy face so I know that everyone can see and it should say nurturing creativity. Does everyone see that image? I'm getting an X to that. Okay, let me... Okay, so, Louise, maybe just get you to come on the mic for a sec and tell me, in this new Blackboard format, I've shared my desktop, but I'm seeing people say they're not seeing it.
Did you go up under Tools and Application Sharing?
Did you go up under Tools and Application Sharing?
Okay, so you'll find there's a shortcut right above the whiteboard.
So you'll find there's a shortcut right above the whiteboard.
I'm just going to show you. Stop
right above the kind of clear page, it's two screens overlapping.
Right above the kind of clear page, it's two screens overlapping.
That.
Yep.
Okay, here we go. It's starting to come through.
Okay, here we go. It's starting
to
we've got it.
Come through.
Does everybody else see it now? Okay, we've got it.
Okay.
Does everybody else see it now?
Okay, I'm going to check so we're seeing it. Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. Now, David, when you say there's an echo, is that when I'm speaking or Louise is speaking? Okay, thanks. I'm hoping because I'm wearing a headset, so I'm hoping it's working okay. So I'm going to have to cover up the chat box, and then I will try to uncover it occasionally because I'm going to ask you to think back. So I wanted to make a link tonight that you'll see, and it'll evolve over time. So I put the thinker up here, but I also wanted to start off with a bit of a humorous take on, I'm hoping to pick up my iPad on Friday, so I thought this was an interesting note to look at, a cartoon that I saw recently about why digital technology will never replace paper completely. So we'll make that connection as the evening unfolds. Here's what I want to do to start us off. I shared this at an arts conference in York Region. I want to start us tonight with this. Reasons why creativity in the arts in particular actually can enhance retention of content for kids in all subject areas. And I just want to share, I'm going to fairly quickly share some thoughts and then ask you which of these you use, which of these could you use, how might you use it in your subject. But these are reasons as we explore creativity and the integration of the arts, or what we learn from the arts, and how it can help students retain content in any subject area and why it's important for their success in schools. So here are some reasons from the research that we want to think about that. Elaborative rehearsal. What this means is moving kids beyond rote memorization, but inviting them to practice. So elaborative rehearsal, you can see, is helping kids see the whole, connect the pieces. So using things like having kids learn material through music to learn the piece, to help memorize or remember information. Elaborative rehearsal is the practice, the application of learning in a practiced way until to help solidify it. I don't know if I'd like to show you a video, but I don't know that my video will work. So I'm going to try this, and Louise, I'm just going to have to, if you can quickly tell me, I'm going to launch a video, and I'm just going to play a little bit of it, but I need you to tell me if, in fact, the video works. Now let me ask, when I just do this, do you hear my speakers going up and down? This will give me a sense of whether or not the sound from my computer comes through.
Looks good so far, Garfield.
Oops, sorry about that.
Looks good so far, Garfield.
Okay, so I'm going to start this. Just tell me if you can hear the sound. Now this is, as you can see by the start here, a video on the Black Death, but done to Gwen Stefani's Hollaback Girl. So I'm just turning down my sound in case this comes through a little loud. I don't want to deafen anyone.
It's the pig, gonna kill you in a few days. Okay.
Now I'm just going to pause it. Does the sound come through on your end, or are you just seeing the image? Sorry, Louise, is that happy face? You were able to hear the sound? Yeah, okay. So I'm going to continue the song just a little bit. Great. Okay, I'm going to play a bit of the song, and then we'll talk about it for a second.
Dynamic so severe, like their cause that's horror and fear, and there ain't no cure for that girl. You'll be dead in no time flat, girl. You get acronym process from the yes and you tested, and it makes you come a black girl. Gonna bury you out and back, girl. Started in China, don't know how, but the Mongols use biological warfare. As Kappa, hurl fake corpses, oxygen, weed. The Italians back at the Sicily, 1950, 47. Like that, got a load to Europe in the form of infected fleas. Some port cities on long trade roads, few boats sailing in the nose, and it spread real fast like that, girl. Better flee when you see your rat, girl. People living for the now, bro, like the book by both types of joke. Or you could be a flagellant, girl. Plug yourself so you a pet, girl. Let me hear you say, this plague is bubonic. B-U-B-O-N-I-C. This plague is bubonic. B-U-B-O-N-I-C. This plague is bubonic. B-U-B-O-N-I-C. This plague is bubonic. B-U-B-O-N-I-C.
So I'm going to stop it there. Any thoughts on the video? That first of all, what I was using it for is just to get you to see that if after this song I were to ask students about the underlying cause of the plague, they would in their mind, I'm sure, be humming fleas on rats, and so on. So I just wanted to show you that that video as an example of music helping students with what we call elaborative rehearsal and learning the information through that kind of repetition, but being able to recall it better and just learning the content. And later on, if you want, we can talk about, so what do we do with a video like that? How does that help nurture creativity? And what might we do with it in a critically thinking classroom? Anyway, I just wanted to show that piece, and I'm going to take this back over so I can advance. These are going to be some quick examples. A semantic elaboration. So when we have kids create stories, songs, or you can see works of art where they have to flesh out details. So we give them a topic, they have to add details, they have to add information. They're going to make more sense of a topic when they have to add the information to fill in details. So we might give students a topic like Black Death or another. And by the way, if you're interested in that video, if you go to YouTube and you put in the history teachers, you'll find 53 different videos like that where they've taken on everything from the French Revolution then to Lady Gaga's Bad Romance to Fergalicious, the song Fergalicious being used for Cleopatra and so on. But if we have students then take a topic for which we give them only a bit of information and they have to create their own song, we call it semantic elaboration, where they have to then flesh out or create the story and add the details and make it work in the story. And in the creation of that story, they will tend to remember the details better. Another way that using creative processes can help students remember is called the generation effect. Again, so they have to infer differences. So students are given minimal details. They fill in the missing pieces. They fill in the blanks. So for example, one of the things you might do is I put down as an example here, students are shown a painting and we ask them to step into the picture, for example. So I'm going to show you a painting. You have to create a tableau, recreating that painting, and when I say go, bring the painting to life. What conversations would happen, what happens next, or reverse that, have students do a short skit and freeze the skit in a tableau of the painting. What happened in the few minutes before this was taken? Students have to infer, they have to look at the picture closely to infer emotions, and they have to try to make sense of it based on what we know in general, based on what the picture shows us. Can you fill in missing details? It's called the generation effect. The enactment effect, physically acting out material, getting students to make sense of and I've seen this used lots, for example, in science and other areas, where show me a scientific concept by acting it out. Show me how you would demonstrate this concept through physically reenacting this. Or so take any concept and have students have to think about and reenact it. Effort after meaning is another way that we can engage students in developing an understanding of content through kind of thinking, as David said, outside the box, where students are given information that's not clear. They have to try to solve a puzzle or make sense of something for which it doesn't quite make sense. They have to solve this. They have to make meaning of it. So using aesthetics experiences often are helpful in this, and having them make sense of this painting. Why do you think the scream, what was going on in that painting, make sense of this, or a poem or a painting, decode it, try to make sense of it, read into it. And that will deepen students' understanding of content. When we use songs, arts, any other emotional arousal, students are more likely to retain information when there's emotional content. One of the things that we've found in the research and is that if you want to nurture empathy in children, it's actually more likely that you will nurture empathy through the use of fiction, through the use of song, through the use of drama and dance, even more so than reading first-hand accounts. That reading primary accounts by students may fall flat, but the use of the arts can actually deepen their emotional connection with it, and therefore their retention of the information. And lastly, pictorial representations. Students, when they see, and we know from the research from multimodal learning, that if I read about and see, if we can give it in I can hear it, see it, read it, I'm more likely to remember. But notice from a pictorial side, in terms of the brain research, memory, as you can see in the second point, memory for pictures is encoded both in the visual and the verbal parts of the brain. And so anytime, as I say at the bottom, that you have a multimodal representation, students will retain it better. And ideally, we want the multimodal representation happening at the same time, so not hear it now, then see it, or separate the words from the image. But if they're together, it tends to be the most powerful learning for students. So that's a quick, I'm going to come back to this page in a moment, but I want to pause and take a look, and then just slide over so I can see the chat box. Could you take a few minutes, and I'd be happy for you to jump on the mic and share some thoughts. Which of those that I went over fairly quickly, and my apologies for the quickness of that, which do you currently use? Did you have an aha moment? Ooh, I might try this, or I could add this to what I'm doing. So could you either type in a thought that you had about something you might use in your class, or a way that you're already using these kind of techniques to enhance students' retention of information. And I'm going to turn off my mic for a few minutes and just have us look at some of the comments that pop up.
Hi, Garfield. I'm just going to jump on for a second. What I'm seeing right now for your central goals of 21st century, and then that's the border of your screen, can you expand the right side of your window a little bit? It's looking good. Almost there.
Sorry, but Louise, I slid it across because we weren't going to use this for now. I just wanted people to respond. Oh. And then I'll slide it back over in a minute.
No problem. Thanks.
This is David here, just giving some comments on the Tableau idea. Haven't used it in my setting, but what I have done is, I guess you call it a podcast in today's language, where my students write a script on a particular topic. They create characters, they role play, and the script and the characters, it's all recorded on a Roland R09, which is a digital recorder, and then we dump that into our iMac at school, into GarageBand, do mix down, and then we add all sorts of sound effects and that kind of thing. And what I found is an example of a topic we did had to do with, it was during Earth Week, and they had to give an environmental message, trying to get students to turn off lights at home and do composting, recycling, that kind of thing. But they made it into a really cool skit. It was all recorded and then played as a PA announcement. The kids enjoyed the process. They enjoyed playing it back for their friends, enjoyed downloading, making MP3 from it, putting it on their smartphones, but also for the next 3 weeks, it played each morning and afternoon on the announcement, so that was kind of a highlight for them.
That sounds wonderful, David. I want to ask you this. In terms of, if I were then to give them a recall test after this, do you think they would, you've gone a route that was much more involved in having them create a product as opposed to learn information in a traditional sense. How do you think they would perform on a traditional recall test after doing this exercise?
I think for the recall test of the content, it was there's certain parameters I gave them, but the content specifically, because I have produced radio shows and TV shows before, but there was a specific goal, like a thesis they're working towards. And since they created characters and they made voices up for each of these characters, I think students who listen to this, not the ones who created, but the ones who listened to it, would have identified with certain characters, certain voices and accents, and then applied that to the content information. It was sort of like one of the characters wasn't doing all these environmentally friendly type things, and he had a certain voice, and the other voices were kind of encouraging him. And I think the voice, the texture, the accent is what the students remember, and that would help them in their the results of their test.
Great, thanks, David. The reason I want to raise that question is, and this is less of an Ontario issue but I certainly encounter it when I'm working with schools in Alberta, for example, where in high school at least, their grade 12 diploma exams count for 50% of their mark. And in Maryland, where I work, they have state exams, and if they don't perform well in state exams, schools can be taken over by the state and so on. So high stakes testing, and invariably, these kind of critical and creative applications, teachers love them, they want to embrace them, but their resistance or their hesitation is because of the standardized test. And I wanted to just point out that in fact is a flawed understanding of the process and the benefits of the learning through the creative processes. What Robert Sternberg's research found is that when we engage kids in thinking and problem solving and so on, they actually perform better on content recall tests. So even if my ultimate goal is content recall, kids who've had to work with the content and work with the information to create and understand perform better on recall tests. And so what I want to encourage is that we think about the benefits, and these aren't just in place of more rigorous learning. These are in fact strategies that will deepen student learning, and they'll perform better on tests. And David confirmed that, and that's why I wanted to raise that point with you. Now, I just wanted to quickly set that up, and I want to shift into. And some of you may have, depending on what OTF conference you're at, we may have talked about this, but I want to just set up, the central goals that many jurisdictions talk about when they talk about 21st century learning. They talk about learning needing to be, as you can see on this in the front piece here, inquiry-based. So it needs to be driven by invitations for kids to interact and work with the material. It needs to not simply have them react to the information, but also have them generate new and novel ideas and innovate. So you can see that it has to be, we want to engage kids in inquiry that's an imaginative and productive inquiry, and that it's often in work with others. It's not just working alone. And I want to share with you, in reading from across North America, different statements on what we refer to as 21st century learning. The 7 big ideas that are consistent across and that repeatedly come up no matter where you're reading this, is that in the 21st century we need to nurture learners who are, as you can see, critically thoughtful, who are creative, sorry, I just want to fix the piece here, who are critical, creative, and collaborative thinkers. In the Critical Thinking Consortium, we call that the C3, that we need critical, creative, and collaborative learners. They need to be able to communicate through a variety of mediums. They need to be global in their thinking, be able to self-regulate, and to be digitally literate. Those are the big ones that come across North America in conversations around 21st century learning. And I'm just going to loop back a little bit. I know all of you have been to TC Squared presentations. That's why you're here tonight. And I just want to raise this. This line comes from, or this passage comes from a poem by T.S. Eliot called The Chorus of the Rock that he wrote in 1934. And what caught my attention in this is especially the last two lines. Where's the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? Where's the knowledge we've lost in information? And just thinking about, in an information age in which our children have access to more information than any generation before them, at their fingertips, in the palm of their hands, they hold more information than, probably the library that I had when I was in high school held, and it's in the palm of their hand. The world is in their hand. I'm not sure they have more knowledge, though. They have more information, but do they have more knowledge? I'm going to show you one more slide, and then I'd love to get some comments. T.S. Eliot's poem actually spawned some research that led to the creation of what's called the data, information, knowledge, wisdom hierarchy. And it looks looks like what you see in front of you now. That data is, if we do a survey at the end of the night to see how today went, we have some data. When we compile the data that each of you provide, when we, as you can see, connect the parts and kind of put them together, we have information. When we begin to see that as a whole, what does this tell us? And we interact with that, and we have to do the thinking about it, we move to knowledge. When we look at information across many different wholes, and we think about how that's going to impact on our actions, we move to wisdom. I want to suggest to you that, as I said, the internet is filled with information. Our textbooks are filled with information. Movies we show in class are information. What do we need to do to make sure that we're building knowledge? And I want to suggest to you that even our achievement chart, knowledge, understanding, that knowledge is not simply recalling information, that information and knowledge are not synonymous. Knowledge kids have to build, they have to own it, they have to make sense of it. So what are we doing in our classrooms to help kids construct knowledge? And wisdom. So David's example, it seems to me, is as kids have constructed an understanding of the dangers of not acting in responsible and sustainable ways, and they begin thinking about their actions and their future actions, their place in the world, their responsibilities. They're now working towards wisdom as they join the wholes together but reflect on, and we can, so what are we doing in our classes to build wisdom? I want you just to respond there, any thoughts you might have on this idea of working through a data, information, knowledge, wisdom hierarchy, and thinking about how we develop and deliver our curriculum and our assessment practice. Are the assessments we're using primarily assessing information? Are we assessing knowledge? Are we allowing students to reflect the wisdom that we're gaining? So let's just pause for a moment and see your thoughts on this. So I'm going to move along. I'm not seeing too much. So I just need Shelley, thank you for posting that. The time to reflect on topics. So, I think one of the reasons this became of interest to me is there's a lot of talk about students constructing knowledge, and it caused me to think about what does it mean to construct knowledge if we're using knowledge and information synonymously. I can't really construct as a student. I don't construct new information. I access information. But I can construct knowledge as I make sense of it when I connect what I knew before to what I'm learning now, and I make sense. I construct new knowledge, and as I think about it in new ways and kick around ideas. So what I wanted to do, I'm just using this as we begin thinking about the role that creativity plays in this. I'm just bringing this back up because this will come back to us this evening. The critical thinking framework, I'm sure you're all familiar with, building that community, framing invitations to think critically, to solve real problems, and teaching the intellectual tools. I'm not going to belabor it because all of you, we've talked about this. And just a quick reminder, the 6 ways that we engage kids in thinking critically. That, just a refresher, that we can invite kids to critique the piece. So to take an individual, a particular performance, an event, a work of art, whatever it might be, and consider its merits in light of criteria. Sometimes we judge the better or best. So in that case, we take 2 or more people, performances, works of art, whatever, and we decide which one best reflects the criteria, meets the criteria. When we rework the piece, we change the perspective, we change the purpose. When we change something about it, we rethink, how would you redraw that? How would you change the ending? How would you rewrite the story? When we decode the puzzle, you're looking at an image, looking at data, looking at doing a lab in science. These are all decode the puzzle, trying to look for evidence and make sense of the information presented. When we design the specs, we create something. We write a paragraph, we create a work of art, we create a dance, and so on. These are design specs. And when we perform the specs, we carry out a task, deliver a presentation, do the dance, play the sport. Now, from the lens, I want you to think for a moment from the lens tonight of creativity. One thing I want you to look at is that the 6 prompts, we need to think about creativity as generative thinking, that critical thinking can involve both generative and reactive thinking. If you take a look at the 6 prompts, you'll notice that critique the piece often is reactive thinking. In other words, the work of art, the song, the movie, whatever it is that I'm critiquing has to exist in order for me to critique it. So I'm reacting to something. Judge the better, the best is the same. That the 2 people, events, they exist for me to judge. I have to think about something that exists. Decode the puzzle is the 3rd one. That is, it's a response to an existing work of art, a body of data, whatever it might be. But I want you to know the others. Rework the piece is generative in nature. So although there might be an existing piece, I want you to think about it differently. I want you to redraw, I want you to create something new, so it's generative in nature. Design the specs is generative in nature. I want you to create something to convince someone. I want you to do something new, so you design the specs. And often perform the specs. Performance is often generative in nature. So you'll notice in our critical thinking prompts, some invite kids to respond to or react to. Others invite kids to be reactive. And let me just, again, sorry, I'm just going to quickly check to see if there are any comments that I need to be responding to. So I just try to keep track and back and forth. Okay. Oh, interesting question. Is there difficulty in expecting creativity on demand? Well, let's bring that up as we move along. That's a great question I want us to explore. I wanted just to reconnect to these 6 prompts, and I'm going to do this fairly quickly. I sometimes will use in the session a song by James Blunt called No Bravery. And the question I'll ask students is who is he? And if you can take a look, I'm just going to play you a wee bit of the song, so I'm going to turn down my volume a little bit just so you get a flavor of the song. I won't play the whole thing. I'll leave the words up there, and I ask students to think about who is he. So here's the song, just as I say, just a little bit of it. Get this set up right.
Beautiful song. Stretched into the sky, tears drying on their face. He has been here. Brothers lie in shallow graves, fathers lost without a trace. A nation blind to their disgrace. since she's been here. And I see no bravery, no bravery in your eyes living on this side. And I see no bravery, no bravery in your eyes on this side. On this side.
So I'm going to stop it there. Just turn up my mic a little louder. And I wanted you to, first of all, just as you recall from the 6 prompts I just showed you, could someone just quickly type in, if you could, when I ask students, who is he, what type of prompt is that? What type of critical thinking question is it to ask students, who is he? Great. So definitely there's inferring involved, and in terms of the critical thinking prompts, that's a decode the puzzle. So I've asked students to take a look at the lyrics, to watch how he performs the song, and try to figure out who is he. Look for evidence, infer based on what you see, what you read, we decode. What I might do in a class, for example, is play the song in its entirety and invite students to try to figure out who he might be. So we decode the song together. But then note, I might ask students next, after we've decoded the song, sorry, I just got something out of whack here, I might then ask them, is No Bravery a powerful song? So what type of prompt is that? So after we've looked at who might he be, we've looked at the clues, we've inferred meaning, if I ask them, is it a powerful song? What is kind of prompt? Which of the 6 prompts is that one? Great. So, who is he? Decode. Is it a powerful song? Is it critique the piece? So then I've asked students, well, what they'd have to think about, what's your criteria for a powerful song, and why do you think it's a powerful song? I might then ask students to create an image that reflects the central theme. So if I said to students, I want you to gather images, and you're going to create the kind of YouTube video with the song layered on top of it, that would capture the major themes or ideas in this song. What type of prompt is that? If I ask students using images, create a video, create the YouTube video that tells me about the central. What if I ask kids to do now? Okay, we could be reworking and the other, because I'm going to show you another rework. So you create the video to go with the song. What have I asked you to do? Okay, so rework or design to specs. Now I wanted to show you, just to make it even clearer, what if I ask students to take that video that reflects the central theme, let me just pull that aside for a sec, and then I ask them to, sorry, I'm just losing some of my, okay, so if I said, now you've created that video using images from today, I'd like you to create that video that you made, but I'd like you to redo it so it reflects World War I instead. See, that might be a reworked piece. If I said, here's an existing video, or a video you created, what if I asked this to be a World War I video, or a Vietnam video, use images there, rework the piece, set this in a different place. What if I asked, which is the more powerful song, No Bravery or Imagine? Right? That would be a judge the better or best. So that students could have to argue, well, I think a powerful song should meet the following criteria, and they'd make a case on why one of these songs better meets the criteria. And if I ask them to come up and present their argument to the class in a very compelling way, we'd be doing a perform to specs. And I just raised this in part to show you that using the 6 prompts, I can differentiate my class where I might begin with the whole class doing a decode the puzzle, but then inviting students to, you can do one of the following 4 different ways that you could respond to the song in terms of how you want to think about the song. So let's decode it together, and I'll pick the way you want to respond to it. Now I want to shift gears, and I want to get more directly in. I want you to do some thinking about the relationship between critical thinking, that's why I did a little bit of background on reconnecting, and creativity. And using an Euler diagram here, so do you think the relationship between critical thinking and creativity is best reflected by A, that they're two separate concepts and that we should approach them as different ways of thinking? Do you think they're best reflected by B, although they share some common areas, the overlapping shaded areas, they are distinct in some ways? Or do you think it's C, that one is a subset of the other, or perhaps there's two circles inside a bigger circle? Or is it D, that none of these really capture the relationship? Could you type in the box for me, please? Would you please type in, is it A, B, C, and if it's D, could you put D and a little bit of description of what your D would look like? And I think I have a hand up. By the way, I'm going to turn off. If you want to give me your answer via the mic, certainly jump on the mic.
Hi, Garfield. It's me. I was just thought that you might like to take advantage of the polling option for the ABCD, so you don't have to track that right in the chat. Everybody, under your name in the participants window, I have changed the green check mark, red X, to an ABCD option, and you can select it there.
And I'll just remind you, if you pick the D option, then you need to come on, please, and just give me a little bit of a description as to what your alternative would be that I don't have up there. So now I've got two B's and two C's. If you picked C, and even if you didn't, if you're willing to accept C, what's the big circle and what's the small circle? And if you want, you can put two circles inside the big circle, but what would the big circle be that would capture the two small circles? And if you're B, could you tell me if one or two things that would go in the overlapping section? What is it that creativity and critical thinking share? So if you could just take a minute via mic or via chat, tell me about what's the big circle, what's the kind of common concept that they both reflect and therefore inside the circle, or what's the overlap if you're B? I like that recall of the earlier slide, that they're both attributes of 21st century learning. Well done. No, Shelley, interesting thought that you have to understand the concept, but then you push it further in creativity. Interesting. And Elizabeth, so you've put the purple, the small circle in C, because thinking, both critical and creative, the thinking is the big circle, rigorous quality thinking, and creativity is a result of that. Great, thank you. And Shelley, you agree. Okay, I'm going to revisit this question in a moment. We're going to start digging more deeply into it. Let me just, this comes from the Ministry of the Arts document, or what they call the creative process. I want you to take a look, and it's a dynamic, not a fixed or static, but there's invitations. There's students are to be challenged and inspired to imagine and generate, to plan and focus, to explore and experiment, to produce, revise, present, reflect, and note the ongoing feedback in between. And I just want to link that. This is from an article that Laura and I wrote on critical inquiry. And when you think about the two that I just showed you, the creative process and the inquiry process, the similarity. They're dynamic in nature, that they begin by inviting students to have to solve problems or engage in thinking, to construct, to investigate, to reflect, to share, and so on. So so I brought the two together. What might that look like if we take the ministry's creative process and the critical inquiry process? That the creative inquiry process, the students first have to identify the challenge. They have to know and understand the nature of the challenge they have before them, what they're trying to create, what their purpose is, whether it's creating a dance, a visual, a storyline, what is it I'm trying to do, and how will I know when I've been successful? They want to think about innovative ways they might approach it, things that might be different or unique. They need to look for sources of inspiration, ideas. I need to find and gather things to think about. I need to be able to access, unpack those ideas, integrate those new ideas I've got with my learned experience that I bring to this, and innovate by creating, this is the construction of new knowledge. How can I take what I've learned, access, thought about, and link that? They then need to assess the appropriateness. So that's a neat idea, yeah, but does it make sense? Does it do what I want? They have to assess their idea. They have to present their ideas to others, get that feedback, and again, it's a dynamic process. So I'm going to go through a couple of pieces with you. I want to suggest to you this now familiar framework, that invitations to critical thinking. I've just tweaked this to show, look, I think it's the same process for creative thinking. That if you want creativity, and the session tonight's really about how do we nurture creativity in students. Well, it seems to me that I first have to make sure and I asked at the beginning, are schools doing a good job of this? Are we creating communities of creative thinkers? Are we inviting children to think outside the box, to take risks, to imagine things in new ways? Are we creating the climate where that's rewarded and valued and supported? If we don't have a classroom where students feel safe, trying things a bit differently. My daughter's in an arts program, and I was a bit concerned that her dance teacher, assesses everything, and there is everything's just averaged together. And I said to her, but how are you nurturing creativity and risk-taking if everything they do in your class is simply being averaged together? You're not creating the conditions of the community where students can take a chance. And if it doesn't work, don't worry about it, because we'll have multiple opportunities. But I have concerns sometimes that if our assessment practice becomes too focused on the right answer and it all counts, then students don't want to take risks. And someone said earlier, they want to know what's the right, what's it supposed to look like, because I need to protect my mark. So how do we create that community or that climate where creativity, I feel safe taking a chance, that I feel that is valued and rewarded? How do we frame the critical thinking prompt? And I talked about some of them, that they can be generative in nature. What's that invitation look like? How do we invite students to come up with ideas that are novel? And then what I want you to think about is that the intellectual tools that you need, and I think Shelley had said that creativity is within the larger circle of thinking. That if you want me to be creative, if you want me to come up with innovative, novel solutions, I still need background on what it is I'm to think about. I can't come up with an innovative solution to a problem that I don't understand or have no background on. I need criteria to decide if my solution is successful. Does that idea actually make sense? How will I know that I've solved the problem? So any expression of creativity still has to be held up against some rigor to say, this is how I know that that's a good idea and that it works well, because it meets a set of criteria. What is the creative thinking vocabulary? What are the terms that kids need to be familiar with? I'm going to share with you some thinking strategies that look a bit different. What if my goal is not to help kids reflect on something, but to generate new ideas? What thinking strategies would we use? And what habits of mind do I particularly want to nurture if creativity is my goal? Which of the 19 habits? So for example, being open-minded, being comfortable with ambiguity. These are habits that we want to nurture in kids if we want them to truly be creative. So there's the earlier comment that I read that said, you have to understand a concept first, and then you push it further through creativity. Fits very nicely with, this is something I was reading a recent journal article on neuroscience around creativity, and it pointed out that, first of all, that creativity, there's no part of the brain that uniquely works with creativity. Creativity is not a particular, from a neuroscience perspective, set of neural networks that are fired. Instead, you see here, creativity is the epitome of cognitive flexibility. It's the same working memory the background knowledge kids use, but note it's the ability to make the appropriateness of the solution. So if you look through this, creativity is working memory, sustained attention, flexible use of that information, judging the appropriateness, all of these pieces of critical thinking. So creativity is in fact the epitome of good rigorous thinking. So the question earlier about on the spot, there are two different ways that we can be creative, what the neuroscience suggests. Novelty is sometimes generated, it can be either deliberate or spontaneous. We can ask kids to generate novel or new ideas or innovative ideas. That's deliberate. I want you to think of a new idea. And sometimes you're just kind of hit by an idea. It's spontaneous. And it's regardless of how you're doing that, as you can see by the note here, it's within the prefrontal cortex that the computation of that idea transforms from novelty into creative behavior. You might be struck with an idea, but it's the frontal lobes that have you think about, hey, that might be interesting. Sorry, I have emails that come in while I'm online, so my apologies for that. I want you to note, though, that so whether or not I'm sitting deliberately trying to think of a novel idea or I've been suddenly hit by an idea, it's in the frontal cortex that I have to process that and think about, but is that a good idea? Is that a possibility? Will that solve the problem I've set out? So novelty, notice here that the prefrontal cortex, novelty becomes more fully conscious. It's where we assess what might be a spontaneous idea or a deliberate idea. So I want to use, if I could, just for a moment, sorry, I'm just pausing to read a couple of comments here. Great. So I want you to just take a look, and if you could, just think about how you might fill this in, and I want to be conscious of our time, but if you were to fill in any part of this, if you were to write a definition for creativity, what would you put there? What is creativity? If I would ask you to list an attribute or characteristic of creativity, what would you put? If you were to give me a yes example of creativity or a no example of creativity, what would you put down? I want you just to take a minute, and any one of those, and maybe you could type it in the chat box, or you can come on the mic, and just say, I would define creativity as, give us a statement. I think an attribute of creativity is, throw something down. Here's an example of creativity, or here's a non-example. So I'm just going to give you a minute, and either by mic or by chat, could you just respond to one of the four areas, please? Great, thank you. So we've got a few popping up here now. Shelley, thank you for that, jotting up some thoughts on what is creativity, and Susan for some examples, generating new ideas, processes, and so on. We're gonna come back. We're gonna revisit this. Let me just move on. I want to show you building some background knowledge in critical thinking. We want to look at that. Here are a variety of statements from various researchers, writers on creativity. So a special class of problem solving characterized by novelty, any thinking process in which original patterns are formed and expressed, imagining familiar things in a new light, digging below the surface to find previously undetected patterns, fluency, flexibility, originality, using different modes of thought to generate new and dynamic ideas, the process of bringing something new into being. Could you take a look at those, and again in the chat window, pull out a word, a phrase. If you were to go back to the previous page and add something to it, what would you add? Which words resonate with you? Oh, I like that. That helps me understand creativity. So if you could pull out a couple of words or phrases, what would you add to your definition or explanation of creativity? Just throw a few of those down. So Susan, these are previously undetected patterns. Great. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here. And what I want to suggest to you is that there is a strong synergy between critical and creative thinking. And in fact, I probably should change the slide because I want to suggest to you that in fact there perhaps is no such thing as creative thinking. And I want you just to think about that statement. There in fact is no such thing as creative thinking, that instead there is creativity. And this thinking is emerging from the work we're doing in the Critical Thinking Consortium, led by Sharon Balin, who is one of the persons who helped create the Critical Thinking Consortium. Her doctoral work was in the area of creativity. And she suggests that, in fact, creativity is a product of good, rigorous critical thinking, that it's not a different or distinct way, that instead of even looking for it, I need to change my title here, it's not a synergy between, but in fact a realization that creativity is simply an example of good, rigorous thinking. You'll note this comment by Robert Weisberg, that people who study creativity agree that for something to be creative, it can't just be novel, it has to have value, and has to refer to a product that has use. Let me just extend that by saying, so what is creativity? Key couple of pieces here. It's not just brainstorming, okay? So the key thing in thinking creatively or creativity is not simply, oh, I got a neat idea, or oh, I got this idea jumped in my head, or you're so creative because you say bizarre things. It's not undisciplined. Creativity, as you can see, is targeted, it's purposeful, it's contextualized. There's a reason for the thinking, there's a reason, something you're trying to solve. So you can see there's a context, that it's not just imagining, as you can see here from John Seeley Brown, it's making the familiar strange, imagining, making the strange familiar. So three things. Of course, you know, in critical thinking, we're big on the use of criteria. For something to be deemed creative, okay, we need to think about a set of criteria. I'm just going to offer these up, and I'm watching our time. Three key things. Something has to be produced. It doesn't make sense to say someone is creative if they don't create something. Creative comes from the root. Creativity and creative come from the root to create. So if I have an idea but I never act on it, if I never take ideas and formulate a theory from that, create a work of art, choreograph a dance, that for something to be considered creative, there has to be something that's produced. That creation has to be novel. It's unlike we've seen before. It's different from someone else's. And that creation must add value. It has to have significance or help solve the problem it was intended to. I could have a wonderfully novel idea that no one's thought of, but it doesn't solve the problem. We would not ascribe to someone the term, that person's a creative genius, because they had a new or novel idea, but it doesn't solve the problem. So the three things that we look for in creativity. Is there a resulting product? Again, that product could be a theory, it could be a dance, it could be a song. Is there something created as a result of the thought? Is that novel or new in some way or original? And does it add value? Those are three key things. So here's what I want to do just for a moment. Imagine that I asked you to create an effective poster that showcases your school's vision for 21st century learning. If this was your challenge, So it's a critical thinking prompt, just like we've talked about in the past in critical thinking. But your job is to come up with a poster that showcases your school's vision for 21st century learning. That's your challenge. What criteria might we use? Remember I said to you that creativity, there has to be a product and we have to decide, is that working? So I'm asking you to use creativity to come up with a poster that will communicate your school's vision of 21st century learning. So the criteria I might use to decide, is this poster creative? Does it have immediate appeal? Is it an attention grabber? Do people want to look at that poster? Is the message clear and important? And thirdly, does it cause one to pause and think or alter the behavior? Is it, because the intent in creating the poster is to force us, to get us to start thinking differently about education. Have you grabbed my attention? Have you clearly communicated a vision? Does that vision that you communicate cause me to reflect on and think how I might alter my behavior? So that's just modeling for you that even when, whether I'm asking students to choreograph a dance, come up with a song, come up with a way to visually show something, to write a story, but I still have criteria to decide. And by the way, this tells us that we can effectively assess for creativity, that it's not something that I'll know when I see it, that we can assess it. We need to build background knowledge. If I'm asking students to respond to something in a creative way, they need to know the issue that they're responding to, so we have to build background. I want to just quickly show you a video clip as a way I might build background. And just ask you to watch it. We'll just watch a bit of it and then think about what emerges from this that you would like to integrate into your poster. If I, in fact, had time for you to create the poster, what would you put on that poster? How might this add to it? So let me just launch this for a moment. Sorry, it appears I have a slow connection right now. So let's return to that in just a moment because we don't have a lot of time. So once I've built with the students the background knowledge that they need to be able to think about deeply a creative way, I need to review what habits, as good critical thinkers, as good creative thinkers, if we're thinking and encouraging and nurturing creativity, then there are some habits that I want to nurture. So one of them is that students are able and willing to suspend constraints, that they're going to be open-minded, suspend assumptions that they have, and let's just generate all the ideas that we can. And I want them to use an inquiring mind, and this kind of blends a number of habits of mind in. I want you to have an inquiring mind, that you'll be open to new ideas, that you'll consider, that you'll be comfortable with ambiguity, and that you'll persist in generating new ideas. Those are three habits that I want, that in the creative classroom, I need students who will suspend their assumptions, who will be open to new ideas, who will persist in the generation of new ideas, and will be comfortable with being ambiguous and not having all the answers right away, but being willing to explore and consider new ideas. Those are habits I'd want to nurture in students. Let me just see just for a moment if the Born to Learn is loaded up a bit better for us now, and we can just watch a bit of it.
Ever feel like you're capable of far more than what society expects of you? I know I do. Remember being a teenager and school being less about a passion to learn and more about getting good grades? How many times did you sit in class, bored and desperate to just get away? Every teens felt that. Albert Einstein acted on it.
Okay, my apologies. If you get a chance, take a look at Born to Learn. You can see the website here, .org. It's got some helpful short, sorry, I'm just going to get back to where we were. It's got some helpful short clips that address the brain research and learning. And I think are somewhat provocative, that force us to think about what are schools currently doing, how might we approach it differently. And I use as an example building background for us as teachers to think about what might be some of the areas that we need to rethink practice and the structure of schools and so on. Now I want to get to the thinking strategies. What if I want students to generate novel ideas? You saw the definition that if it's creative, then you have to come up with something new and novel and had to add value. So how do I help kids? Someone asked, is there a problem of expecting creativity kind of on the spot? And to just say to kids, think about this, but think differently doesn't help me. Just like in any other area of thinking, whether it's in critical thinking and assessment and so on, I need to give kids strategies that will help them to generate new ideas. And we've been working in the consortium. We have 10 now. I'm going to share with you 3 of these, and we'll do it fairly quickly. But here are 3 ways that we can engage kids in thinking, trying to generate new ideas, new and novel ideas. So synesthesia, exaggeration, and analogy. So here, for example, an analogy. I'll just pull this out quickly and show you. For analogy, you pick one of the visuals that you see, and you complete the prompt by coming up with as many words as you can. Suspend, as I said earlier, any constraints or assumptions. It's important kids understand no idea is too crazy or off the wall. We want to encourage fluidity here. Just generate ideas. Throw everything out that you can. Then you might ask kids, now that you've got lots of ideas on the table, arrange those words or phrases into 3 columns. And how did you cluster them? Choose one word from each of the columns and use that to start thinking about an approach. Oh, sorry, I've got the wrong poster. To how you're going to create your poster about schools. So, now note the differentiation here. I can say to students, you can use analogy, synesthesia, or exaggeration. Which one are you most interested in? With analogy, learning is like a symphony. Learning is like a garden. Learning is like quilting. Learning is like whitewater rafting. So you can substitute anything you want, any concept you want, but how is war like? How is whatever the concept that you want, how is science like? And the students pick the one that they want to complete. The key is they don't start with the word, for an example, in this case, learning. They start with the other. Think about gardening. What does gardening make you think of? What do you do when you garden? Generate all the ideas and see if you can find a link as you're generating those ideas back to learning, back to the key idea. What happens in whitewater rafting? What do you see in the picture? What's this have to do with learning? The whole idea here, by asking me to think about learning and showing you a picture of schools, if you do that, the brain's going to think in a very linear way that when I think of learning, I think of A, B, C, D. Here what you're trying to do is to force the brain to make some lateral moves, to kind of get it thinking differently about something. This is about making the familiar unfamiliar. See, can I generate a new idea and get it to fit with what I know? So it's to generate new. Or synesthesia is in fact a mental condition where people see or perceive the world through the senses. We can use this to encourage students to generate new ideas. So for example, in this case, what shape is learning? If I ask students, I want you to think about learning as a shape. Do you think shape is it? Is it conical in shape? Is it a square? Is it a hexagon? Is it a circle? And typically you wouldn't think about learning as a shape. And so first, well, I'm thinking it, and then I have to come up, and that might spawn an idea, oh, we should create our poster like this. What color is learning? Is learning pink? Is it black? Is it white? What color and why? Again, you're trying to generate ideas that are different from the norm. Now, what does learning sound like is probably the most common. What does learning smell like? What does learning taste like? So again, what we're trying to do is generate novel ideas. Remember, students then have to take that novel idea, so we've got a new idea, but does it work? Does it help capture what we believe about education? Do I have a new image, a new metaphor I can use, a new graphic that would help? How does this fit? And so kids have to go back to that criteria. Is this going to help advance? Or exaggeration. In exaggeration, we give a statement such as traditional forms of education are failing our children, and we magnify the problem so that all of our children will eventually fail miserably if we don't change this. Or we shrink the problem, or we reverse the problem, or you caricature the problem, or you turn the problem upside down or inside out, and you invite kids to think about it that way. Again, all of these are simply ways that we're trying to get kids to generate new ideas. But I want to keep this focus on this moving back and forth between critical and creative. As you generate new ideas, we go back to our criteria to say, is that a worthy idea? Is that idea going to help us solve our problem? And then we weed through, so we've got all these ideas on the table. Now let's decide which ones are best suited for our problem, for the task that we have at hand. So we're almost at 9 o'clock, and I don't want to hold you up, but I want to just come back to, and we'll do another vote if Louise could set this up. In light of the conversations on my talk in the past half hour or so since you last voted, would you see the relationship between critical and creative differently if you voted again? This time we'll leave A off because no one picked it. Now we'll put it back on. Maybe you've changed your mind and want to go to A. Which of these, and again, if it's D, maybe you've got a different way of seeing it than I've even allowed here. Could we just do a quick vote? How do you see the relationship between critical and creative thinking? And sorry, I'm just catching up on the chat, and Susan, I want to respond. Absolutely, I believe when you asked us, so can we teach creativity? I think this is really important that we recognize, yes, in fact, we can teach creativity, and if we're going to assess, and by the way, in our achievement chart in Ontario, we're to assess critical thinking and creative thinking. And just from good assessment practice, to assess a child on something we can't teach is fundamentally wrong. You know, it would be like saying that, well, some kids can do math and some can't, and I'm going to assess them, and if you just can't do math, you'll never get a good mark. I think we would all be appalled to think that we're going to mark kids on something that we actually can't teach. They just have to be able to do it. And this is the problem with creativity, that if I'm going to assess it, I have to be able to teach to it. Now, this is not to say, just as you're voting here, this is not to say that that it isn't true that, I mean, sorry, let me get my wording right here. Some children are inherently more creative than others. I have no question in my mind that some children will more naturally generate creative ideas and respond more easily. But I would also say some children will more naturally and easily be able to understand math concepts. Some will more naturally write and write with a kind of a flair that others don't. And some kids will naturally be deeper, more critically thoughtful without. I mean, we didn't invent critical thinking. It's been around for a very long time. The goal of teaching and the role of teachers is to teach in ways that we help all children be more successful at things that matter in education. And if we think innovation and creativity matters, then we need to find ways that we can support all children. So some who come to it naturally and more intuitively, wonderful. What do I do to close the gap so that all children can innovate and create? And what I was trying to show you in some of these examples and these strategies, these are strategies that will help children who may not by nature be creative have an opportunity to be more creative in their output. And then it allows me to say, well, if creativity is reflected in, were you able to generate new and novel ideas that had value, I can assess the degree to which your creativity is reflected in your work. I think otherwise we get into a very dangerous place of assigning marks for creativity, but not really knowing how to teach to it. And so tonight's a bit of a quick overview of this, but a beginning of the conversation that, in fact, creativity needs to be seen, and I think to be valued, to have meaning and true value. We can't see it as something that's just kind of spontaneous or out there. That creativity is good, rigorous, quality thinking, and deserves to be taught in such a way that we see its value, and taught in a way that we can assess it. And so I wanted to respond to those questions that absolutely creativity needs to be something that we can teach to, we can support kids, and we can assess it. Any final comments? I see it's 9 o'clock, and my apologies for getting on a few minutes late there. Somehow the link had disappeared off my computer, and I was having all kinds of trouble finding it. So sorry, it felt a little rushed, but I hope it's been a little provocative, and there have been a few ideas that you can take away and think about, that you can try out the strategies, synesthesia, analogy, apply criteria for creativity, getting kids thinking about creativity being a product of good thinking, not just something wild and crazy. I hope those are helpful ideas for you to start the journey in exploring it. Great, thanks so much for your feedback. And if there are any final questions before you go, let me know. Otherwise, I'll say good night and thanks for participating.
Thank you very much, Garfield. It does look like there's a couple of comments coming in the chat there. While we wait for those to pop up, I just want to ask everyone if they could visit the link that's right there on the screen to provide feedback for us. OTF does take your feedback very seriously, and we appreciate the opportunity to provide these kind of sessions for you that meet the needs that you currently have in your classroom. And I think Garfield's presentation tonight was really timely, because I think we do focus a lot on some of those hard and fast skills, and that creativity is sometimes thought to be just a part of arts or something like that, when really it's infused in all thinking. Anytime you have kids generating ideas and producing novel and creative things, as Garfield mentioned. What else was I going to say? Oh yes, Sirius Skirhan, who is the administrator of the OTF Connects program, couldn't stop by tonight, but she sends her thanks as well to Garfield and to everyone for joining in. And we do hope you take the opportunity to check out more of the sessions. Garfield does have a couple more that will be available to you. You can check that link there at the bottom of the screen and check out those and sign up for some more sessions. We also have a couple of critical thinking sessions that are presented by Usha James as well, that have just been posted to the OTF Connect site today. So do take a look and explore more opportunities. Thank you very much, everyone, and we hope you get a chance to enjoy some more of this beautiful weather we're having.